So I just wanted to say a warm welcome to everyone to the Together Twilight sessions. My name is Holly and I'm the programs producer for Together Productions, who are an art for social change company, and our programs are all about bringing people of all backgrounds together to make music. So yes, welcome to everybody. I've got a few ground rules. We're filming this event, so if you can please mute your mute your video if you don't want to appear. And then if you can also save your questions until you're invited to ask them, that would be great. So please keep your muted audio on throughout. Tonight, we're joined by Emilie Amrein and André de Quadros. They're the co-founders of the Choral Commons, which is a community platform who aim to provide a space for choirs and conductors to envision innovative and equity-centered practice, confronting racism, poverty, ableism, LGBTQ discrimination, displacement, and many more important issues. They're both based in the US, and they're incredible educators and thought leaders in the fields of music and social justice. And tonight we also, of course, have the brilliant Jeremy Hanneman, who is the director of Together Productions, and he is here leading these important conversations in the UK too. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion, so please give all of them a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Holly, and really thrilled to be joined by André and Emilie. And I am both huge I am fans of both of them, tremendous fans, because they've been inspiring me for years. And I did a course with André that was really life-changing for me, sort of 12 years ago. So yeah, I'm super happy that we can, thanks to the COVID, we've got a bit more of an international collaboration going on, so it's marvelous. So yeah, delighted to welcome André and Emilie to us to chat with us today. So should we kick off? Maybe do you just want to say just a line about yourselves, what you're up to?
Sure. I'm happy to start. My name is Emilie Amrein, and I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you so much, Jeremy and Holly, for the invitation. I teach at the University of San Diego here in the United States on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people. And I have a long and winding relationship with choral music. And I think one of the important parts of my story is that I'm a parent of a child with a disability. And to that end, I like to give a visual description of myself as part of this kind of practice of radical inclusion. So I'm here today wearing a black yoga top and pajama bottoms, and also a scarf that is black and teal and red. I have dark brown hair, glasses, and I'm wearing red lipstick. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Emilie. And that was so thoughtful to do that description. I'm wearing a white shirt. That's about it. André.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us to describe ourselves, because not everybody is sighted, and I think that's really important. So I'm here wearing a black shirt, and that's all about. It's about all you can see of me, and a bald head and on top of the black shirt and with black glasses. Today is indeed International Human Rights Day, and I think I was going to say that from the beginning. And as a Latino Asian person of color, as an Indian, I also want to acknowledge this idea of colonization, and how colonization is a persistent feature of our world, not just in the past, but even today in so many ways. And that colonization, certainly in my country, destroyed, in the country in which I was born, destroyed indigenous peoples, their cultures, their stories, their music, just as it did in Australia, where I lived for so many years, and so forth. My original name was stolen from me by colonization, and we don't even know anymore what our original family name is. So I live in the United States, but that's not my original home place, and I've been a kind of a nomad myself as a refugee, as an asylum seeker, and as a choral activist in different places and different settings. So thank you very, very much for inviting us, Jeremy. I've been following Jeremy's work for many years since we first met, and we've collaborated frequently, and we've been grateful for those collaborations. I should say that Jeremy was the opening episode in our Choral Commons voyage, and I called it a maiden voyage, but he said that's probably a little bit too cisgender, heteropatriarchal kind of language. But anyway, back to you, Jeremy.
I don't think I quite said that, but yes. Andre, there are many members of our choir, the mixed up chorus, here in this room, probably 50% of the audience. So we love mixed up, and you're a perfect example of mixed up in the best sense of the term, I think. There. So tell us about the Choral Commons. You're on
if there's anybody in there from Mixed Up Chorus, you want to give me a wave or send me a message in the chat box, I'd be so happy to say hello. Sorry, I jumped in on your question, Jeremy, and I think Emilie can answer that.
Yes, before you do, Emilie, if anyone wants to has a question, by all means write it in the chat, and we'll try and keep track of it as we go along. So Emilie, tell us about the Choral Commons.
Sure. So the Choral Commons is a media platform, podcast project, and community organizing space that André and I developed as part of a kind of pandemic pivot. We really have been working and collaborating for several years now, André and I, here in the United States. The primary project that we've collaborated on is a cross-border project called Common Ground Voices La Frontera, which works with refugees, asylum seekers, deported people, and the internally displaced at the US-Mexico border. And when the COVID lockdown hit in March, we were really stymied and tried to figure out, like, what could we do to continue the conversation about reimagining and reorganizing the choral ensemble space as a place of radical imagining, where we can start to model in community shapes and relationships that might be better representative of our values. And so we were thinking, well, the best place for us to start this would be in conversation. And so we started this podcast project, and we, over the course of the summer, produced 12 podcast episodes with choral professionals, community music practitioners, and activists who are kind of doing things outside of the mainstream in choral music. And as part of those conversations, we also incubated kind of new compositions that are kind of communally driven. And we premiered 8 brand new choral works in our first season. So that's really kind of the snapshot of what the Choral Commons has been. We've been on hiatus for the last several months as we've been teaching and kind of dealing with the kind of extension of the pandemic lockdown, and we're in development for our second season now.
Fantastic. Could you say a little bit more about those compositions, and how they manifested? Because I found it pretty extraordinary.
André, why don't you take this one?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to do that. So first of all, I just want to amplify something that Emilie was speaking about, and she talked about this response to the pandemic. But it's not only the response to the pandemic. What we say is that this choral thing, this thing that we call choir, essentially people singing in groups, have been doing it for 60,000 years or so. But more specifically, the kind of thing we talk about choir is a place of infinite power and possibility. It's the thing we love, right? And we love it, and has infinite power and possibility. And it's a power and possibility that has not been sufficiently explored. The kind of work that Jeremy is doing, the kind of work that other people are doing in many different places, saying how can we take this issue of injustice? How can we take these other issues of exclusion and so forth, and frame them and make them front and center within choral music. That wasn't happening about 25 years ago or so. That's very much a feature of 21st century choral practice. And so the Choral Commons becomes a space in which we celebrate this kind of work and understanding and starting to plumb the depths of what is possible and what is powerful. So in the Choral Commons, we had these podcasts, and then we created these the Voices 21C, the ensemble that I lead in Boston. We created these sound projects. There were choral compositions, all created digitally and quite extraordinary. We're going to maybe Emilie, this is a good time to just play literally 2 minutes if we can of the last one. This is just the last one, and just a bit of introduction. This takes us back to the border. So Emilie and I have been, I should say Emilie has done extraordinary work, both in the leadership side of the Choral Commons, but also in the work that we do in the border. So we have worked at the United States-Mexico border, where we have a catastrophe of refugees, the scale of which you have not seen in the UK. We have hi Holly, so wonderful to see you, Holly Jones. I'm saying. We have these mass deportations. We have children separated from their families. The kind of inhumanity that you might only see on TV. You don't see that in the UK because the UK is essentially so protected from that. You see other kinds of brutality, of course, and exclusion. So our work had taken us to there, and so specifically the Common Ground Voices La Frontera project was a choral project on both sides of the United States-Mexico border, and we took that as an example of a creative project that we did. So perhaps, Emilie, you can do a kind of a fast-moving. If you can put on all of you, fasten your seatbelts, and Emilie's going to do a quick run through of this. It's a 4-minute something video, but that's a little bit too long. So she's going to kind of fast work of that. And let you hear some of this sound stuff too.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Can you tell us more about what was happening there? How did that come about?
Sure. So we had this conversation with a US-based choral conductor named Ahmed Ansaldua, who is a Mexican conductor but has Egyptian ancestry, and we're talking about, you know, border crossing and ambiguity of identity. And so we took a quote from his aunt, actually, the great Chicana poet and scholar Gloria Anzaldúa, and we used that quote as the text source for this sound sculpture, right? And you heard that both in Spanish and English in the recording. I asked our singing participants to contribute sound files in a variety of different kind of improvisational patterns. And I gave them basically like a list of 5 things that they could do and to choose 2 of the 5. And then I assembled that. But one of the really important and interesting aspects of this sound sculpture, I think, is that I also used found sounds, a borrowed recording that was made by a sound artist here in the United States, Glenn Wyant. He was based in Tucson, Arizona at the time, and he went down to the border of Arizona and Mexico in the city of Nogales, and he took a microphone and he attached it to the border wall itself. And then he took a cello bow and bowed the wall, and the very kind of ethereal sounds at the beginning, and in fact throughout the entire sound sculpture, were the sounds of the wall. And if you were to isolate those sounds, it's a very haunting sound. And in fact, I thought one of the things that was most fascinating about it is just actually the overtones actually made the sound actually quite human. And you realize that this, in fact, is this construction that human beings have made to separate one another from ourselves and from our neighbors, you know, just across the border. And so then with the digital audio workstation that I was using, I basically like assembled this piece using the sound files that everybody contributed. And then we dubbed the audio to these 3 video files, 3 dancers. You saw André at the beginning in Boston, in a mask, which I thought was like so, I'm so glad that you had that kind of mark of this particular time. And then also singer Lorraine Padden, who is a dancer based in San Diego. And then we had Miroslava Wilson, who is a dancer based in Tijuana. So 3 dancers kind of representing this feeling of longing and separation and kind of yearning for another possible world.
Amazing, Emilie. Yeah, really amazing.
I put the link for the entire thing on the video, on the chat. But I do want to say one thing that is important to say is that the text is "Caminante no hay puentes, se hace puentes al andar," which is translated "Voyager, there are no bridges. One builds them as one walks." And so what we are saying here effectively is that we see ourselves as bridge builders and as people who overturn and dismantle the walls, but building bridges as we go.
I love that expression. I think that's really amazing, that you build them as you walk. So you don't just talk about them, you actually are walking them into existence. I think that's a really beautiful thing there. Can you tell us more about the content of the Choral Commons, and who do you talk to, and also who do you not talk to?
Oh, we have so many interesting conversations about this. Do you want to talk about that, Emilie?
Sure. Well,
we talked to Jeremy first. Everybody should know this. He was our first guy. We invented the Choral Commons with a podcast with Jeremy.
Right.
I was very honored. I was extremely honored.
Yeah. So the Choral Commons as a media platform has really kind of 4 components. And if you were to go to the website, you could see how we've organized it around listening, which is basically where we house the podcasts. kind of creative responses where we've housed those incubated arts projects, like scaling walls, building bridges that you just saw. We have a section about kind of learning where we have some resources, and a part of that has been kind of trying to shine a light on fields of practice that are outside of the mainstream. So for again, choirs and community music projects that work with the homeless, for example, or in incarceration, or in psychiatric facilities, right? And so some content that is still in development in each of those areas. And then the fourth part of the project is community engagement, where we have conversations that are more open, and it's not about kind of consuming content, but in fact about having an actual conversation in real time. So those are the four kind of content areas of the Choral Commons website. And then in terms of the conversations for the podcast, we were really intentional about, in this first season, inviting people whose work challenged some of the norms of what we call the prevailing choral practice, the mainstream again, right? We wanted to talk with people who were locating their work on the side streets of choral music. And some folks who don't even necessarily identify as choral practitioners. So, so we have an episode where we have two women who identify as theomusicologists who work with the US-based organization, the Poor People's Campaign, and they really use music as a tool of protest in response to the many kind of social inequities here in the United States. We had conversations with formerly incarcerated individuals. We, of course, had conversations with people who might resemble like what comes to mind when you think of as a choral conductor, people working in academic contexts, in community ensembles, but working perhaps in spaces that are adjacent to that in some way, or one foot in the academic realm and one foot in the activist realm. So for example, we had a conversation with Andrew Clark, who teaches at Harvard but runs a community music project for disabled singers. And so, we were again trying to really center work that is happening off the main street.
And who don't you choose? Like, how do you decide what is the mainstream and what is off the mainstream? And I'm curious in that, because it maybe in the States it's different to the situation in the UK.
Right. I think that's a very good question. And when we think about the larger concepts of kind of radical inclusion and what it means to be a community, I think that you have to acknowledge that though certainly André and my kind of personal, political, and spiritual beliefs are about like the interconnection of all humanity, that any community, there is like a circle that you're drawing around a specific group of people, and some people are in the circle and some people aren't, and we're trying to kind of make those boundaries more permeable. Who is not in as just an example, I had a colleague who asked to be featured on the website, and he runs a Bach program in Texas, and it was like a professional choral situation, and we declined that opportunity just because it seemed like there were lots of other avenues and places and platforms for that work to be considered. So there's certainly I love Bach. I grew up kind of singing in the Lutheran tradition, and so much of my own singing experience, Bach is a character and somebody whose music I resonate with deeply. So it's not that we have necessarily something out for Bach, but we didn't want to like use this particular space to center that work any more than it is already being centered in every other professional choral space in this country, certainly.
Sure, that makes sense. You used a term, Emilie, radical inclusivity. And inclusivity is a term that we've seen bandied about all over the place in the UK in lots of things. And you've added the word radical to it. And I just wondered if one of you wanted to say more about what does that really mean?
Andre, how about you tackle this one?
You want me to second guess your term? Well, I mean, I have a problem with the term inclusion, because the moment we talk about inclusion, we're talking about exclusion. You know, I mean, I think inclusion has been co-opted by the corporate world to just change the color of what it is that we're doing, and I think that's a serious problem. I mean, Frantz Fanon talked about this, about black skin, white masks. I think it's an interesting thing for us to reflect on. And as somebody who was born just after the independence of India, what happened in India was kind of interesting. And I mean, this is a reflection of what Frantz Fanon was talking about in terms of colonization. The British handed over power in India to the British educated folks there, so some of whom actually spoke English better than they spoke Hindi or any other language. Mahatma Gandhi was a British lawyer. He was admitted to the bar in Britain. Mahatma Gandhi discovered vegetarianism in the UK, and we don't sufficiently understand that what happened is that the entire elite who took over the running of India after Indian independence were British educated people, and they protected effectively the transfer of British knowledge and British. When I was growing up, books that we had were all British textbooks, including British textbooks demeaning Indians were all after Indian independence. They're all just there. And so understanding that is really important. Understand, the Lord Mountbatten was the first Governor General of independent India. Think about that. Think of how wedded India was to Britain, and they didn't want to relieve themselves of colonization. So understanding that inclusion is very much about saying, well, I have set up the table in a particular way, and I'm going to include you to come here. I mean, you can come and sit at my table, but you can't eat with your fingers because educated people don't eat with their fingers. This is what we had set up, this concept of inclusion. You can come to our social gatherings even after independence in India, but you can't dress as an Indian, but we need some Indians there. So I think inclusion has simply become a superficial coloring and ethnicizing of what we see, rather than actually a more radical welcoming of diversity of thought, diversity of thinking in different kinds of ways. So I like to talk about the what I quote this from one of our esteemed scholars who talks. I talk about this as in terms of dismantling systems of art making and intellectual work that privilege core North over periphery South. I'm quoting here: men over women, Christians over non-Christians, Europeans over non-Europeans, heterosexuals over homosexuals, and Western knowledge over non-Western knowledge. That, for me, starts to get at the issue of radical inclusion and exclusion. And until we can actually talk about inclusion in that kind of way, we're not talking about anything that's really seriously going to change the society that we have. We have a crisis of historic proportions that involves whether this planet is going to survive. And what we've had in the past is not what we can have in the future. And so what we're talking about, this radical, I'm not sure whether this is what Emilie was going to say in terms of radical inclusivity, but we're talking about this, certainly in terms of Choral Commons, as being a space where these difficult, tough questions start being handled within the context of the nexus of choral music.
Just jump in if that's okay. Can I do? Is that okay if I just
leave?
Awesome.
Sure.
That was a very long.
No, it was great. It was great. I mean, it really encapsulated so much of what this project has been about, and our ongoing conversations about the larger structures that we're trying to challenge and provoke further thought about. From my own personal experience, my daughter, she's 10 years old now, about to turn 11. She is nonverbal. She has a rare genetic condition, if you wanted to kind of think about it in a sort of medical understanding of her particular disability. She experiences school in a very American way, in that most of her day is in a room that's separate from her peers, in a room for other students who've been labeled as having moderate to severe learning challenges. And for a portion of her day, she is moved from that room to the mainstream classroom, where she has experiences in music and art, in physical education, in science, and in some kind of social activities, recess and lunch and that sort of thing, right? And so, I come to this concept of inclusion really from this personal experience, right? So in her school setting, Ellie, my daughter, that's how people talk about inclusion. They are including her in those parts of her day, right? But the reality is that she is excluded from absolutely like 75% of the day, right? And a radical inclusion isn't just, well, let's just put everybody together and force this particular curriculum that only works for a portion of students, but rather questioning all aspects of curriculum, of assessment, of the social relationships that we cultivate in any particular space, and recognize the ways that all of these things are designed for some minds, for some bodies, for some body minds, right? And so in this way, it like connects to race and ethnicity, to gender, sexuality, gender expression, and the history of colonialism, and all of the things that Andre was talking about. But I think for me, it's very it's an easy thing to understand when you start to see it as, well, what is Ellie experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and how is that actually not inclusion, and how might we dismantle all of these aspects and recognize the way that we continue to design and redesign systems to work for some but not for all.
Right, I got it. I mean, there's a huge amount to unpack in what you've both said there. I wonder if we could talk about, if you're someone who just turns up to your local choral society, you come and sing in a choir. How does any of this relevant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll just start, and then Andre, you can kind of take it over from here. But I think that for people who grew up like I did, as somebody who really, I was part of the mainstream. I am part of the mainstream, right? Like, I'm a white upper middle class woman here in the United States, and I grew up singing in church and school choirs, right? That is the mainstream of like what choir is understood to be here in the United States for the most part. I think it can be a very disorienting thing to have every aspect of choral practice being challenged. But I think, one of the things that I would love for people to be able to experience is an invitation to use your voice and your kind of creative voice, right? Not just your physical voice, but your creative voice, your subjectivity, your personal experiences, and to interlock that voice, the series of voices, with others in this kind of communal practice. That sounds like a little bit woo-woo, but on a practical musical level, the idea of being asked to improvise and have a chance to have, my musical ideas, my textual ideas, parts of my story connected to this kind of larger collective, it's so empowering. And, I think of the work that André has been doing in prisons and the methodology and approach that he developed there that he calls empowering song. This is like the perfect invitation to use your voice in this particular way. And so maybe André, you could kind of expand on that.
I don't know what you said it beautifully, Emilie. I'm just wondering, and I'm just I know that we're kind of getting close to the edge of 45 minutes. I'm wondering if there were other questions we should take on.
Well, look, there's a question I wanted to ask both of you, which is about the future. I mean, the last year has been pretty extraordinary for planet Earth as a whole, with the pandemic, with the extraordinary political situations. I mean, the era of Trump and all that. What do you see as the future? I mean, André, you talked about a crisis, real crisis for humanity, and what might be your dream or your hope for the future that we can do in the choral world to make some kind of dent or difference?
It's a very difficult question to answer because choral music is not going to save the planet, but science is not going to save the planet, and mathematicians are not going to save the planet, nor are environmentalists going to save the planet or save us from injustice. I think we have to do it together. Every single piece of humanity, every single one of us working together, every single one of us joining hands together, every single one of us using every form of human practice, whether that's the arts, the music, choral music, mathematics, science, all of us working together. And in that sense, the question to ask ourselves is a question that Howard Zinn, one of our great American historians, said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. The point about that book is that the planet is headed in a particular direction. It is the government, our governments, the corporate world, society, the systems and structures that you have in the UK and the systems and structures we have all over the world are taking our world in a particular direction. We have to say collectively, this is not the direction we want. And we have to use our art form or all aspects of our work to make change. And so for regular people who come into singing, who want to just sing choral music and have a good time, why not? Enjoy it. I mean, we get immense satisfaction and pleasure out of singing, and we should do that. But to understand that it all belongs together. I mean, what we've been taught for so long is to elevate certain musics above all else. I was brought up to think that British was better. Must be better. The fact that they could rule us means that they're better than us. I was taught to believe that. I grew up with a national inferiority complex as a brown person. I have worked pretty hard to try and change that for myself. But I mean, so we got a lot of work to do to change mindsets, to change people. We're not going to do it with violence. We have to do it non-violently. We have to do it with compassion, with love, loving kindness, and so forth. I mean, so what is choral music got to do? It's just got to be in there with the fight, with the struggle, with the love.
Thank you, André. Emilie, do you want to add and then we'll open up the floor, I think.
I've just found this great inspiration in the work of queer activists, people of color here in the United States. And there's a quote from a poet and author named Sonia Renee Taylor, and I find this to be like an anthem of sorts in terms of looking to the future, which is what your question was, Jeremy. And I'll just read this to you. Sonia Renee Taylor, she says, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And so thinking about the future, for me, it's a moment of opportunity. We're crossing a threshold, and there's really no returning. And again, as she says, we should not aspire to return to the way it was. And I am so I just feel this sense of solidarity that folks who are working in these various circles are recognizing the way that these struggles are interconnected, and Andre's right. Choral music isn't going to save the world, right? But science isn't either. But who is going to save the world? We are, right? And we are going to do it together. So thank you very much again for the invitation to talk with you all today. It's been such a great joy.
Listen, such a pleasure. I wonder, there's been quite a few comments in the chat about various things, but I wonder if anyone would like to vocalize a question to André and Emilie. Anyone like to? You're welcome to just unmute yourself and just do it. Oh, unusually shy people.
Have silence to them.
Yeah, silent. Just looking in some of the comments in the chat there about inclusion and about different models in the UK, and yeah, there's a request to send the link to that quote that you did there, which was brilliant. Oh, there it is. You've already done it. Amazing, amazing. Babe, yes. So listen, I want to invite everyone to visit the Choral Commons. Is there a way for people that you'd like people to engage with the Choral Commons?
Sure. Yeah, so if you go to the website, www.thechoralcommons.com, there'll be a little pop-up window that asks for your email address. And if you feel like you'd like to be on our mailing list, that would be excellent. We also have, we send out a newsletter periodically, and we'll look forward to kind of launching season 2. So if you want to stay in the loop about what we're working on in the future, you can sign up for the newsletter on the website. You can find the Choral Commons podcast on a variety of platforms, depending on how you like to listen to podcasts. So if you're an Apple user, perhaps you do the Apple podcast and iTunes and all of that, and you can sign up to subscribe to the podcast. All of our episodes are free. You can also access the podcast on the website. We have a Facebook group. If you're on social media, you can connect with us there. And we're working on kind of building out that Facebook group at the moment. And hopefully we'll have it a little bit more established. We would love for you to come to our community conversations and that sort of thing. Again, I think the easiest thing to do would probably be to sign up for the newsletter where you'll get all of this delivered to your inbox.
Fantastic. We could probably go on talking for another 3 hours. We've only just, this is just whetting our appetites for things there. But what you've both said is profoundly moving and profoundly beautiful, actually. And there is a feeling in the air. And I know a lot of people who have joined our choirs have this feeling of urgency, a sense of urgency about things and about life, irrespective of what stage of life you're at. So thank you so much for amplifying that and speaking so elegantly and eloquently about it all. Can we give a huge thank you to our special guests from the United States today, Emilie and André, for being our...
Thank you very, very much for being with us and for sharing together and breathing the same digital air together. So
yeah, it's lovely.